All right, here we are for our quick last video for this chapter. I know it's been a long chapter, very important one though. Okay, it's really setting the stage, so it's important. Okay, we ended off on the second video talking about guidelines, and we introduced the basics of a nutrition label. I gave you some example nutrition labels to do some calculations for practice. All right. And there's a last few things that are also included in packaging. In addition to the mandatory label that all packaged food must have, remember packaged food like in the center aisles, there are guidelines about what a food manufacturer can say. So if a package says reduced fat, lean, fortified, there are actually guidelines that must be met in order for them to be able to say it, which I think is pretty fantastic. So the FDA provides that they have to meet certain guidelines. When we talk about supplements later in this course, when we talk about a whey protein canister or any of those sorts of things, there's not the same level of oversight. Not at all. So we're talking about packaged foods, which are much more closely FDA regulated. Supplements and medications, it's not medications, supplements, let's just say supplements, are under a whole different category, and they have much less guidance. So if you pick up a vitamin C supplement, it's under a different guideline, and they can say whatever they want. Actually, but we're talking about packaged foods. So a packaged food, whether it's a box of cereal, whether it's a bag of Oreos, these packaged foods do have guidelines, okay? I'm going to give you a list. You don't need to memorize these. That would be ridiculous. I'm just going to give you some examples. When a packaged food says reduced fat, it must have 25% less fat compared to the original. So there are some guidelines, right? So let's put it to the test. We have a regular, and these are updated nutrition labels, regular potato chips. I grew up in Maryland and southern Pennsylvania, so Utz, that's what we eat, folks. Utz. I think they have that up here now. The Utz regular Ripples have how many grams of fat per serving? 10. On the other hand, the reduced fat per serving, same brand, same Ripples, reduced fat has 7 grams per serving. Does that meet the guideline? Well, we do the math. The total grams of the full fat is 10. We subtract 7 from that, so the reduced fat has 3 grams less. 3 grams divided by the total, multiplied by 10, is 30%. So the reduced fat Ripples have 30% less fat than the original. Does that satisfy the guideline? Yes, it does, right? To be reduced fat, it must have 25% less fat. This has 30. So it does. Otherwise, it wouldn't be on the shelf, folks. Other examples, lean. This one I really like to talk about. Lean can be used if it contains less than 10 grams of fat per serving. Well, let's give an example. You're not going to be surprised, folks, that a lot of these food companies, they know this, and they're going to bump up as high as they can up to that 10 grams of fat. This is an old label, but we can see Hannaford, lean, right? It's packaged as lean. It's packaged as lean, 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 lean. In order to be lean, it must have less than 10 grams of fat per serving. Here's our serving size. How many total fat is there per gram? 9.97. That's about as close as they can get to the rule, right? What's the rule under 10 grams of fat? This has 9.97. So it still counts, but boy, is it close. And remember, most of us are going to have more than one serving, 3 ounces. All right, these I would like you to know. Processed. Let's just face it, most of our packaged foods in the aisles of a grocery store are processed. And what that means is they add some chemicals, they add some things for the purpose of making it taste better so they can make more money, and primarily to increase the shelf life, right? If we had fresh ingredients, they would not live long enough to make it to the grocery store on the semi-tractor trailer and be on the shelf for a week. So the way that we get our food, it kind of has to be processed in this way. Certainly, some foods are more processed than others, but that's what that means. Refined is another word for processing. So let's just clump those together. Processed or refined means that things have been added to improve texture, taste, and increase shelf life. Processed and refined means that things have been added to improve taste or texture and increase shelf life. Now, what some of these companies will do, they process them or refine them so they can stay on the shelves long enough, but then they go back and they replace the nutrients. If they replace them back to their original levels, that food can be enriched, which is interesting because doesn't enriched, I don't know, to me, enriched sounds like they've added something. Well, really, they've just replaced it back to what it was. Fortified means that they replaced the nutrients above original levels. So fortified is better. So processing or refined means that they add some things to improve taste or texture, increase shelf life. And by the way, in the process of refining, some of the nutrients are lost, right? By adding chemicals and putting it through machines, we lose some chemicals. We don't use the whole part of the grain, for example. And then sometimes these companies will replace those nutrients. If they replace them back to the original level, that is said to be enriched. If they replace them above the original level, it's said to be fortified. So here are some examples. Whole grain. Now, it's not just wheat. If you look at a wheat product, that usually just means it's brown in color. It doesn't have the same thing as whole grain. Sometimes it does, but you want to make sure it says whole grain, not just wheat. Because whole grain means that when they process the food, they use the whole part of the grain. It's still processed, some chemicals are added, fine, but they use the whole grain. And in doing so, it maintains more of its nutrient value. So it's going to be more nutrients. If I look at this in the whole grain, isn't that list longer than just this? Yes. Fortified. So remember, I said fortified means that they replace nutrients above the original levels. If you look at a lot of products, it says fortified. An example would be milk. A lot of our milk is fortified with vitamins A and D. If you look carefully on this, it says it just says vitamin A and D. If you looked at the asterisk, it would say fortified with vitamin A and D. They purposely add it. They know that a lot of us are not going to get enough vitamin D. Many of us aren't outside the way that we used to be. So it's actually a way that it helps us to meet our nutrient needs by purposely fortifying nutrients that we may not be as likely to get enough of. So it's not just marketing. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's also to add some things that we need to get. Okay, in addition to guidelines to being able to say lean, reduced fat, there are guidelines about what claims they can make. Okay? Some of these we've already discussed already. The ones that we just discussed are called nutrient content. So I would like you to know these. A nutrient content claim is what we just talked about. Fat-free, lean, reduced fat. These must meet FDA criteria. Okay? So when they say that, it must meet a criteria. There's other claims. There are health claims. Now, there's two subcategories. Health claims that meet scientific agreement or are authorized, and qualified health claims. So what is the difference here? We're looking at health claims. The first one was nutrient content, low fat, high fiber. must meet an FDA guideline, nutrient content. It's some claim about the contents in that food. A health claim is exactly what it says, a health claim. But either it is authorized, like this one, can help lower cholesterol. That's a health claim. It's not talking about how much fiber it has. It's talking about how this food can affect your health. Or it could be something like heart healthy. That's a health claim. But then there's qualified versus authorized. The authorized is really the best. An authorized health claim, it's been reviewed by the FDA and is supported by scientific evidence. There must be significant scientific agreement. Isn't that great? So when they say that, now usually it'll be like, along with a healthy diet. So you don't just eat Honey Nut Cheerios all day to lower your cholesterol. But at least there's some guidelines. So the authorized health claim means that that health claim has been proven by research, supported by research, I should say. And it's a significant scientific agreement. On the other hand, there's a qualified health claim. It is supported by some. Notice the difference. This one has significant scientific agreement. This just has some scientific evidence. So there might be a paper or two about it, but it's not yet agreed upon necessarily. And this is a more recent thing, they must have a claim. So you've taken these heart-healthy Planters nuts. If you zoom in on the back, qualified health claim. Scientific evidence suggests but does not prove. Okay? So an authorized health claim has significant scientific agreement, a qualified just some evidence. Lastly, there is a structure function claim. This is not the same as low fat, a nutrient content. It's not the same as a health claim, can lower cholesterol, can help prevent heart disease. It's a structure function claim. Describes how a nutrient affects the body. This is kind of a middle ground. Why I point this out, there's no FDA approval for this one. But there are guidelines, right? So these companies will word things specifically, right? This breakfast cereal, antioxidants, to help support a healthy immune system. It's not saying helps your heart. It's not saying lowers cholesterol. It supports a healthy immune system. So this is kind of a middle ground, but the important thing is that there's no FDA approval needed. All right. I think this slide is here by accident, so please ignore. All right. But what I want to end this is go over the nutrition label practice questions, and then there's a couple slides at the end about nutritionists and titles. All right, so here was our example. If you ate the whole box, I wanted you to do 1 cup prepared. And then if we look at how many servings, because a serving size is 1 cup, but this has 3 servings. So if I ate the whole box, how many calories have I ingested? Well, I take the 1 cup, multiply it by 3. So 360 times 3 is 1,080 calories, just from that 1 box. If my total calorie need is 2,000, I've ingested half my calories just from that. That's a lot of calories and not a lot of nutrients. What nutrient was present in the highest? Well, I like to look at grams. So there's 12 grams of fat per serving, 49 grams of carbohydrate, and 10 grams of protein. So between carbs, fat, and protein, what is there the most of? Carbohydrates. How many total grams of carbs, fat, and protein did you eat? Well, I take each of these and I multiply them by 3. Good. Looking at the fat content, would you say there are a lot of healthy fats, or were there more unhealthy fats? Well, if I look at the fat breakdown, 4.5 grams are saturated, which is the unhealthy. We'll talk about this more later. Well, 4.5 is just over a third. They say that 10% of your total calories should come from a saturated fat. So the fact that saturated fat makes up over a third, there's more unhealthy fats. This one here, let's say you had 1.5 cups. So a serving size is 1 cup, plus I had the milk. So I take, I just read this from the cereal alone, not including the 1/2 cup of skim milk. I suppose you could have done it that way as well. But I take 1 cup of cereal, 140 calories, but I had 1.5. So what's half of 140? 70. So I had 1 cup of cereal plus a 1/2 cup of cereal plus the milk. My total calories is 296 calories. Does this cereal have more or less sugar than most? Well, what's the carbohydrate? 30 grams. But we want to look at the added sugar. Apparently I can't circle things well right now. Added sugar. So even though if I may not have said it, I was really looking at added sugar. Added sugar is what they add beyond what the grain would have naturally in it. So 12 grams of 30 is a lot. So I would say it has a lot. Probably similar to other breakfast cereals. Breakfast cereals are notorious for having added sugar because it makes it taste better, and then we want to buy more and eat more. What percentage of daily total fat from the cereal did your roommate satisfy? Your roommate takes in about 3,000 calories. Well, to figure this out, we need to remember each of these percentages is based off of a 2,000 calorie diet. So what's the question? What percentage of daily total fat? It is 3% for both of these, right? 3% of a 2,000 calorie diet, but then he had more, so we add 1.5%. So really it's 4.5% of his total calorie need. Do you think this is more or less nutrient dense? More likely more nutrient dense, meaning more nutrients per calorie. Look at all the micronutrients here. Let's look at this one. Nah, not many. So this will be more nutrient dense. The last example I gave you was comparing whole to 2% to skim. How much lower in total fat is the 2% compared to the whole? So per serving, the whole milk has 8 grams of fat. This has 5 grams of fat. What's the difference? 3. 3 divided by the total of 8 times 100, 37.5. Does that satisfy reduced fat? Is it 25% or more less fat? Yes, it is. Which has the highest sugar content? Well, we look at sugars, 12, 13, 12. So it's actually the 2%. That might surprise you. Sometimes foods that are lower in fat, they actually add a little bit of sugar to make it taste better. That's particularly true of granola bars and things like that. This is not a big difference. 12 gram to 13 grams, not a big deal. But the trend would likely continue in other products. If it's lower fat, it's often higher in sugar. So the question is that really better? Maybe not. We're learning much more now about how high sugar diets are so bad for us. Is there a difference in the vitamin and mineral content? If I compare all three, these two are exactly the same. This one has a little bit less vitamin A. You can see that they fortified the 2% in skim, but they're pretty similar. Okay. All right. The last thing for this chapter, and thanks for sticking around, would be credentialing. When you hear dietitian, nutritionist, what does that mean? So what I want to point out to you, you do not need to know all of this. What I want to point out to you, the highest standard that requires the most education, the most, there's a national certifying exam, there's continuing education credits that are needed, would be a registered dietitian. So the best of the best in terms of this is a registered dietitian. And you can see the guidelines there. I am not any of these, by the way. I'm basically more of a physiologist with some knowledge in nutrition, but I want you to know up front, I'm not a registered dietitian. A nutritionist, you might hear that also, it's very different. Associate's degree, experience in the field, state exam. So there's some credentialing here, but definitely not as high as a registered dietitian. That's who I would go to if possible. And then there's a newer specialization in sports nutrition wherein a registered dietitian can actually specialize, which is pretty interesting, right? Okay, but all I want you to know is a registered dietitian is the highest credential, okay? When it comes to exercise and fitness, it's the wild, wild west. I'm guessing a lot of you already know this in terms of personal trainer, fitness expert, blah, 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 blah. There's no one national governing body governing them. People tend to call themselves whatever they want. So I encourage you to ask. If you're seeking advice from someone, you should ask them. Do you hold any credentials? What's your education? There are some educational programs. When it comes to like personal training or fitness, there's a whole bunch. Some of them are just a weekend program. Some of them is just an online course. And some of them, folks, are not much of anything. So please keep that in mind. When it comes to personal trainers, the one that has the highest credential for dietitian would be a registered dietitian. Probably one of the most stringent personal training certificates would be the CSCS, which you probably have heard of. That's the one that I would recommend, right? So just know who you're dealing with. I'm not saying that as you're learning, everyone has to learn, but particularly, in this day and age, I think about people who have an online presence. They're on TikTok, they're on whatever, and they call themselves a personal trainer. They may not have any of these. I'm telling you, they probably don't. Maybe they're just talking about their experience from themselves in the gym, but that's not the same as having a body of knowledge. So what they're saying is probably not even true. Who to listen to? Registered dietitian. CSCS would be the most stringent of the personal trainers out there. What I want you to know is you taking this course will give you a leg up. Like I said, a lot of these personal trainers or someone who calls them a nutrition expert, they may not have even had a course like this. So even after you finish this course, get your grade and move on, keep this information, right? You're going to have some knowledge that some other people don't, right? And I want you to go out there and I want you to spread the word, all right? All right. Good job, folks. Any questions, let me know. We're done with this first chapter.